All right, so just by way of quick review, we are welcome back, folks. We are back into welcome. Yeah, there we go. We got it. Great. There's a little room there. Got it. Hi, Dylan. Good morning.
I'm sorry I'm late.
Oh, that's all right. That's no problem. Glad you're here. So just by a quick review from last week or last time we were in Ecclesiastes. Today we're actually in Ecclesiastes. We're doing chapter 5, verses 1 through 7. But after the glorious conclusion in our last lesson of rejoicing, knowing that our heritage awaits and that all things will be made beautiful in its time. Isn't that a wonderful thing? Beautiful in its time. Solomon brought us back to life under the sun. And this time, or last time we looked at it, this included that of oppression under the sun, which oppression by definition are acts of abuse of power or authority. And that led us to a different poetic structure that used 0, 1, 2, 3. In verses 1 through 3, Solomon argues that 0 is better than 1, and that it's better not to be born than to live in isolation. Okay, now before you become despondent over that, remember he's talking about under the sun, so he's not espousing removing yourself. In verses 4 through 6, we find that 1 is better than both 0 and 2. In that one handful with contentment is better than no hands holding anything, as well as 2 hands being burdened down with a heavy load. In verses 9 through 12, we find that 2 is better than 1. And he gives 4 reasons for that. First, in verse 9, we found that 2 share in the reward for their labor. Unlike the 1 who had no one to share with, the 2 are not weighted down. They share it. Second, in verse 10, if one falls, the other is there to lift him up. Third, 2 give each other emotional support. And fourth, 2 give each other protection. So that principle of 2 being better than 1 in this passage is appropriately applied to many areas of life, whether that be marriage, friendship, co-workers, parent-child, neighbor-to-neighbor, and so on. In my life, I can tell you, through experience, I've seen how this works in marriage. I can relate as a son and mother working together in life, growing up together. I've seen these principles apply with those with whom I worked. And just a really nice visit Friday with somebody who spoke about those days. It was very encouraging. Even working together as father and daughter, I've had real privilege and blessing to experience and continue to experience 3 of those. Well, then the number 3 is added. And what we learned was the number 3 was not, okay, this is where it stops. But actually, for you math people, it's a sequence. So it continues, get the line over it. So it's not just 3, but it's 3 and beyond. Almost got you there. 3 and beyond. And that reference in verse 12 was to a 3-fold cord, not easily broken. We further learned, that's it, I just said that. It's not just 3, but it's even more. There's the proverb, in a multitude of counselors, there is safety. As an example, this ascending number sequence refers to, and I'm quoting from the Reformed Expository Commentary, sharing life together, sharing sorrows, fears, and pains, so that together we might fight the good fight, finish the race, keep the faith, and long for the glory of Christ's appearing. All of us sitting around the table right now, that's what we're doing. This is more than 3. Do the math. We got 4, 8, 9, 10. We got 10 people here, I think. And as 10 people, what we're doing is we're sharing in this life together, encouraging one another, upholding one another. And then finally, we concluded by taking a look at 2 kings. The first king was one. He was the power grabber. Everything must be done according to me. He was the iron-fisted guy. And when he passed on, nobody remembered him and took delight that he was gone. But then came the second king who ruled well and was prosperous. But just like the first king, within one generation, he was forgotten. I'm feeling a little sense of that. But he was forgotten. And that brings us back to vanity under the sun. So that brought someone back. Nevertheless, we still learn that living under the sun requires God's people to connect with one another, support one another, and stir up one another in marriage and family and in the church. There was the quick review. Got it all? Ready to move on? All right. Let's reach deep down inside ourselves and do this. Okay. Also means removing the jacket. So this lesson is called God is the One That You Fear. Turn to chapter 5 in Ecclesiastes. If somebody would want to go ahead and read verses 1 through 7, that would be terrific. What do you think? Read today? Yeah. All right. Somebody want to read that, please?
I've got it. Walk prudently when you go to the house of God, and draw near to hear rather than to give the sacrifice to fools, for they do not know that they do evil. Do not be rash with your mouth, and let not your heart utter anything that is silly before God. For God is in heaven and you on earth. Therefore let your words be few. For a dream comes through much activity, and a fool's voice is known by his many words. When you make a vow to God, do not delay to pay it, for he has no pleasure in fools. Pay what you have vowed. Better not to vow than to vow and not pay. Do not let your mouth cause your flesh to sin, nor say before the messenger of God that it was an error. Why should God be angry at your excuse and destroy the work of your hands? For in the multitude of dreams and many words there is also vanity, but fear God.
All right, so what you just read is yet another poetic device that we find in Ecclesiastes. So we've been going through all these different poetic devices. So this one places God in proper context as a conclusion to everything that we've been talking about through the first 4 verses. It's kind of like halftime. And so we've gone through all these things we've said about being under the sun and God being in the heavens. And now we come to kind of a halftime stop and reflect, and that stop and reflect is fear God. Well, guess what? What's going to be the last verse of the whole book? Fear God. And so that'll be the ending conclusion. So we get a glimpse of that ending conclusion right now. So this conclusion is not to be flippant about God, but rather to fear God. Remember, we talked about fearing God in terms of trembling trust, to revere Him. Why? For God is great, and His greatness, that is the remedy for the troubles we have under the sun. Now, the context of this passage we get right off. That context has to do with worship. Because what do you read right away? Walk prudently when you go to the house of God. So we're getting ready to go to worship. We're preparing for worship even now. So that's the context. The context is worship. And so let's start with the overview. What is this poetic structure? Well, the poetic structure looks like this. So we've got the opening. And in the opening, we have command. And following that command is the reason. So the first command, walk prudently when you go to the house of God, and draw near to hear rather than to give the sacrifice of fools. So we've been in classes for a long time. We know what's next. When you see the word for, what flag goes up? And when you see the word for, what does that mean? Because. Because. Yep, because. Here's the reason. And that reason is that they, talk about the fools, do not know that they do evil. So that's the opening. And then we follow a pattern. And this pattern goes 3 times in this poetic structure. And again, this pattern is a command, followed by reason, yep, followed by the reason, and then each one concludes with a proverb. And so this pattern is done 3 times. And then finally, after all of that, is the conclusion, or what the Reformed Expository Commentary calls the punchline. So here comes the punchline. Is there, and that punchline is very simply, fear God. Okay, so with that background, let's take a look at each one of these individually. So verse 1, walk prudently when you go to the house of God, and draw near to hear rather than to give the sacrifice of fools, for they do not know that they do evil. So remember, this is in the context of worship. And so when you prepare for worship on the way to church, so to speak, you're to walk prudently. Let's take a look at that word prudent. That prudent in the original refers to keep, guard. Word is used that way. Keep guard, observe, take heed. To exercise great care over, to be careful, diligent. So actually, prudent is really a very good translation for this. The most frequent use of this word is expressing the careful attention to be paid to the obligations of the covenant. In other words, it's saying when you come to worship, don't come flippantly. Don't come as if you're going to a rock concert, or as if you're just going to go hang out, or get ready to be entertained, or anything like that. And the commentary gave examples of things that different churches do. He talked about one church who while the band was playing, they got a beach ball that they just kept, bouncing around and everything else. That's an idea of flippantly coming before Almighty God. And what Solomon is saying here, no, you need to come very carefully. You need to come, observe, take heed, exercise great care over. This word is used to pay obligations of the covenant, to laws, to statutes. So throughout the law of Moses, the prefaces about taking heed or be careful to observe, that's what this word is. So this is actually another proof text for what is called the regulative principle of worship. Have you ever heard that? Can anybody tell me what is the regulative principle of worship? How do you worship God? Regularly or regulatively? Yeah, that's good. Worship according to God's commands. There's basically 3 views of worship. The one view is worship however you want. A second view is worship in any way that's not against God's or that is not prohibited. That's it. Worship any way that is not prohibited. The regulative is worship only according to how God commands us to worship. In other words, we don't get to make stuff up. God tells us how to worship Him, and that's how we are to worship Him. And that's why you find service here very simple. I mean, you got prayer, you got hymns, you got reading the Word, you got preaching the Word, you got giving, sacraments, and every one of those you find in the Bible. It says, do this in worship of God. So, as I said before, and just by practical application, to walk prudently is to attend worship, is to prepare your heart, to know that you're stepping into the special presence of Almighty God, and to take on a reverential demeanor. Again, it's not like going to a school assembly, a concert, or a political rally. Going to worship is not born out of tradition. It's not Rectavia talking about tradition. It's not about us and our felt needs. And it's true that God would have us call Him Abba as our Father. But even at that, it in no way diminishes our view of His glory and that trembling trust that we are to have about God. This is serious business, and it requires our reverence. When you go to worship, prepare yourself beforehand. Sing for His glory, give for His glory, listen to the Word for His glory, pray for His glory. And then notice also that as you draw near, according to our passage, that is to actually join in worship, do so with listening ears. So that you catch that there in verse 1, with listening ears. Draw near to hear rather than to give the sacrifice of fools. And what are we to listen, you're supposed to? What are we listening to? His Word. We are here to listen to His Word. Listen to God speak with an attentive heart. And so this one is not any different than what we find elsewhere in the Bible. God would rather have us coming in with an attentive heart, a heart inclined to listening to His Word, than the actual ceremonies. So remember, this is talking about temple worship. Remember the law of Moses. They had all these things that they had to do about in the ceremonies and the sacrifices and all these things. Hosea 6:6. And we see this one repeated throughout the Bible. Hosea 6:6. For I desire mercy and not sacrifice. Here it comes. And the knowledge of God more than burnt offerings. Yes, He said to sacrifice, but don't think for a minute that your acts of sacrifice is really what I'm interested in. I'm really interested in the Lord's mercy. I'm really interested in you knowing God. That's what we draw near to do. To participate in worship rituals, thinking that the rituals is what God desires over a merciful heart, and seeking to know God more, is actually viewed as both foolish and evil. It's also for this reason that God would have us not even participate in rituals of worship if there's an unreconciled matter with a brother or sister. If there's an unreconciled matter, I think I referenced this. I hope I don't. But in Matthew 5 in the Sermon on the Mount, when Jesus said, you got an unreconciled matter, drop your sacrifice right now. Don't even bother until you reconcile. And then come and worship. So it's coming in with a reverential heart. So that's verse 1. When I talk about rituals, I can't help but remember, I don't know, I must have been 13 or 14. It was on New Year's Eve, and I'm cleaning up after after a party held by my mother and stepfather in the house, and all the while I was over at the Angulos playing games and such, and I came home and walked in. It was all quiet, and it was just a mess everywhere. So I just cleaned up. I cleaned up, and then after I cleaned up, I kind of went through this ritual. I don't know that I've ever told anybody this. I went through this ritual of pulling out a pillow and getting on my knees and confessing my sins and making the promise that I'll never sin again, which lasted about, I don't know, 5 minutes. But God was not interested in a ritual. God was interested in a heart that listens to Him, a heart that seeks to know Him. All right, so let's go to verses 2 and 3. Do not be rash with your mouth, and let not your heart utter anything hastily before God. For God is in heaven, and you on earth. Therefore let your words be few. For a dream comes through much activity, and a fool's voice is known by his many words. All right, so here we go. This is the first one, the first of the 3 patterns. So let's take a look at it. So somebody tell me, what's the command in verses 2 and 3?
Do not be rash with your mouth.
Yeah, there you go. Do not be rash with your mouth. Okay, and then, according to, again, Hebrew literature, then comes the repetition, and let not your heart utter anything hastily before God, and then comes the reason, and then the conclusion, therefore let your words be few, and then the proverb. So let's take a look at this. It is with purpose and deliberation that we speak from a changed heart. Again, this is back in the context of worship. That means we exercise care in how we speak before God and with one another. The fact is, words matter. We're fond of saying, well, it's just words, or what's the word? I'm losing it, but this is what I mean. It's not really what I mean. Oh, I love when somebody says something and says, but that's not what I mean. Well, actually, it was what you meant, because you said it. It is with purpose and deliberate. And by the way, I do that all the time as well. This means that words matter. Words, in fact, just while we're here, keep your finger here, go to Ephesians 4:29. Because our words either impart grace or our words tear down. So I don't know if it's just verse 29 or is it 29 and 30? Who's got that?
Go. Let no corrupt word proceed out of your mouth, but what is good for necessary edification, that it may impart grace to the hearers.
Yeah. Let no corrupt words come out of your mouth. Corrupt words are words that tear down. Words do matter. Words have an impact. What may be flippant words or something, those words matter. They can tear down. Or they can impart grace. They can build up. They can lift up somebody. In our speech, one of reverence, respect, and love should be done as we respond in prayer and song and in fellowship, in worship, and frankly, it should be all of life. And what does this look like? Well, the Bible tells us, therefore, let your words be few. What is that saying? But I think you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, less chance to screw up.
Well, it's less chance to screw up. Yeah. Something about don't appear to be wise, lest you open your mouth and show others that you're a fool.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, something like that. But let your words be few. Then comes the reason. Why? For God is in heaven and you on earth. So stop and say, why should you not be rash? Why should your words be few? Because God's in heaven and we're on earth. We've seen that picture before, haven't we? Throughout Ecclesiastes. Where are we? We're under the sun. Where's God? In the heavens. Simply put, God is not our equal. And that's the point. That's the complaint about these flippant worship services that treat God as our best friend or as our brother or one of the founding members was fond of saying some of these songs were God is my girlfriend type of songs. There's a sense of reverence. Why? God is not our equal. He is our creator. We are the creatures. He is above the heavens. We are under the sun. He is our sustainer, without whom we cannot so much as breathe. We are utterly dependent upon him. I remember hearing one person say once, taken back, he said, when I get to heaven, God's got some things to answer for. Whoa, that ain't gonna happen. If you get to heaven, you're gonna fall on your face with the full realization that God is God and you are not. It's the same reaction Isaiah had, Isaiah 6:5. Woe is me, for I am undone, because I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of people of unclean lips. For my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Yeah, this guy, he's going to be falling on his face, I'll tell you that. Well, then comes the proverb. That's an interesting proverb. For a dream comes through much activity, and a fool's voice is known by his many words. What in the world does that mean? Well, a fool, back to the dream, a dream comes through much activity. If you've had a busy day, you've been very active, you've been working hard, and you get to the evening, it's bedtime, and you're really tired, you fall asleep, and when you are in a deep sleep, what do? You dream a lot. Yeah, I've had those nights. Haven't been very many, but I've had those nights where you wake up refreshed, and you know that you've had all these dreams. Your mind has been recharging with all these dreams. Well, that's what he's saying. Just as a busy day produces sleep, along with many dreams, just as that's true, so it is true that a fool is known by his many words. So that was the saying. Or Proverbs 15:28 is another one. This is a good one to remember. Proverbs 15:28, the heart of the righteous studies how to answer, but the mouth of the wicked pours forth evil. You get the picture. It's just like the wicked opens the mouth and all this terrible stuff comes pouring out. But the heart of the righteous, and you notice that we're talking about the heart of the righteous measures or studies how to answer, thinks before saying something. Hence, come to worship, being quick to listen and slow to speak, which is really a good rule for all of life. All right, how are we doing? Good, thumbs up? Okay. You're not saying many words. Wait. Oh wait, that's what we were taught. Verses 4 and 5, when you make a vow to God, do not delay to pay it, for he has no pleasure in fools. Pay what you have vowed. Better not to vow than to vow and not pay. So now this command is to pay your vow. So again, remember when Solomon wrote this, what was he talking about? Temple worship. So on your way to temple worship. Well, part of temple worship were making vows. It was such a vow involved a conditional promise, such as asking God for something in return for something. Leviticus 27:14. In fact, Leviticus 27 is a whole list of those. So verse 14, when a man dedicates his house to be holy to the Lord, then the priest shall set a value for it. So I am asking for the priest to make my house holy. Well, then there's a vow to that, and that vow is to pay a few shekels or whatever the amount set by the priest is. Other examples that we see in the Old Testament, the Nazirite vow. Remember the Nazirite vow? So what were the conditions on the Nazirite vow?
Don't shave your head.
Don't drink.
Yeah, don't drink. And then don't touch anything dead, which Samson did. All three of those, Samson, the Nazirite, did all three of those. Honestly, that happens all the time today. And I can tell you, so Eileen and I, we were on a flight from Maui, returning back to the States. Had a wonderful time. We're flying back. We're in this wide body jet. Maybe, I don't know, what is it, 757 or something like that. And flying over the Pacific. And we went right through a storm. Oh my goodness. I have never experienced anything like that. The plane is just all and then up and then you just look at the wings going like this and just rocking back and forth. And it was just one of those things where for sure we are going down. Of course, I lost the Husband of the Year award when I turned to Eileen, and she's cleaning my arm like this, and I'm saying, "It's okay, honey. Everything's taken care of. We can die." Yes. Dumb. Yeah. Well, I have no doubt that all over that plane, people are saying, "God, if you get us out of this, I promise I'll go to church, or I promise I'll do this." You just know that was happening all over the place. I wonder how many actually followed through with it. Well, nowhere in the Bible does God require such vows. Did you know that? He never required such vows. He made provision for these vows in Old Testament worship, but he didn't require them. On the other hand, there are appropriate times for vows. Wedding vows, a vow to tell the truth in the courtroom, and to not pay your vows before God is not good. Matthew 5:33 through 37. By the way, Matthew 5, and maybe I've said this before, Sermon on the Mount. Folks are prone to, particularly secular folks, look at that and say, look at all this wonderful stuff Jesus is teaching, all this new teaching. You know how much of that was new? Zero. He was actually explaining what the Old Testament laws actually meant, instead of how the Pharisees had turned it. So in this particular one, verses 33 through 37, I say to you, do not swear at all, but let your yes be yes and your no, no. For whatever is more than these is from the evil one. Jesus explains that an unfulfilled vow or oath is from the evil one. This is exactly what we just read. For he has no pleasure in fools. When you see the Bible talks about a fool, he's talking about unbelievers. Our passage goes on to give the proverb, it is better not to vow than to vow and not pay. That's the same wisdom that Jesus gave in Matthew 5:33. And so practically speaking for us today, it's truly better to not engage in negotiation with God like the people on that plane through vows. Rather, it is simply best to pray. And it can't help but go to Philippians 4, 6, and 7. So this is saying, rather than go into negotiating, okay, God, you do this, I'll do this. What do you think? Got a deal? Instead, be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. Really, the only vow we should take outside of marriage is a vow of church membership, or the vow to fear God. That's what we seek to do. All right, let's go to verses 6 and 7. All right, do not let your mouth cause your flesh to sin, nor say before the messenger of God that was an error. Why should God be angry at your excuse and destroy the work of your hands? For the multitude of dreams and many words, there is also vanity. Okay, so now we got a little twist. When I said that this repeats 3 times, well, the first one, see, what was the command on the first one? Don't speak rashly. And the second one was don't vow and not pay it, right? So the third one is not a separate one. The third one is actually the first 2 combined. Do not let your mouth cause your flesh to sin. That's speaking rashly. Nor say before the messenger of God that it was an error. So that part, that messenger of God, is referring to the priest. Priest, that vow I made, really, that was a mistake. Sorry, take that. Okay, we're good? So he says, don't say before the messenger of God that was an error. A mouth that exudes untruth or hurtful language, thoughtless words, or empty promises. What does that do to the flesh? What does that do to the body? What does it do to the person? Causes us to sin. Today's, let's see, I've already mentioned what it meant as far as messenger of God. To vow that your house is dedicated to the sum based on the temple valuation, and then say that vow is a mistake, is a sin. Today's example could be making a pledge to support some project financially and then not pay it. But the fact that this third command is a combined repeat of the other 2 demonstrates the seriousness. Okay, so when we write a sentence in English, let's see, okay, here we go. Here's a good one. Listen to your Sunday school teacher. That's a good one, don't you think? Yeah, okay. So, if we want to make that point emphatically, what do? Exclamation.
You could also add an or else at the end.
Or else. Oof, that's a good one. But if this were a Hebrew class, instead of an exclamation point, what I would do is listen to your Sunday school teacher. It is good to hear him. So what did I do?
Repeated.
I repeated this, right? Well, see, that's again, Hebrew literature. What we see in this one is a repetition of the first 2 here. So it's like what Solomon did was added several exclamation marks. Guys, this is serious. Deadly serious, is what he's saying right here. So then the reason follows. Why should you tempt God's wrath with an empty promise? Remember, that's referring to the vows. Well, while there may not be a direct correspondence today, it is safe to say that living as an unbeliever, as a fool, thinking as an unbeliever, acting as an unbeliever, means that just like an unbeliever, all your works are vanity under the sun. Yet, why should God be angry at your excuse and destroy the work of your hands? That's living under the sun. And so finally, we get to then the last part of verse 7. Last verse 7 is, but fear God. Instead of doing all these things, when you see the word but, so that too raises a flag. Instead of doing these things, fear God. To fear God is to elevate God in proper context. God is God. We are not. God is to be highly esteemed. God is to be revered. How do we do that? How do we revere? How do we honor God? Well, the end.
Worship.
Pardon?
Worship.
Yeah, worship. The end of the book of Ecclesiastes tells us, keep his commands. Strive to live according to his word. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is man's all. That's the end of the book. Oops, sorry. I gave it away. That's where we're going. Psalm 36, verse 1 talks about, again, the flippancy, how people regard God. There is no fear of God before his eyes. This not only puts the unbeliever or the fool into judgment, but related to the temple worship context of the passage, this puts the church that mistreats worship in danger of judgment. So it is serious. Again, back to the Reformed Expository Commentary, I'm going to quote from here. If it, the church, is not found in actual vision statements, it is found in many worship services on Sunday. These churches have made glorious Jesus into their own inglorious image and serve him to accommodate everyone's personal tastes. Instead, this passage, quoting Isaiah 57, verse 15, takes us to the feet of the one who is high and lifted up, who inhabits eternity, whose name is holy. So, I've been to several different churches, as I travel and visit family and everything. Can you think of some practices in churches that are suspect or is creates that flippant or too familiar scene? Can you think of some of those things? Anybody ever been to a church like that?
Went to a non-denominational church with some relatives, and they showed part of the Chosen, the series,
Oh yeah.
and then had the sermon on that, on part of that
Yeah,
episode or whatever.
absolutely. Yeah, I'd say that's a great example. I mean, that's a bad example, but
Yeah.
a good example of a bad practice. Okay. Yeah. Any others you want to bring up?
I attended a mega church once.
Mm-hmm.
They had fog machines.
Oh yeah.
The whole deal.
How else is the Holy Spirit supposed to pass among us?
I know. The whole thing is just a concert. So
Mm-hmm.
Sunday morning concerts.
Yeah, I would agree with you. It does make me think now. It triggered a memory. There's another church where you mentioned the Holy Spirit. It was on Pentecost, actually. This is up in the cities, and at that one, you knew we were in trouble when he read the passage about the apostles waiting there in Jerusalem. So here we find the apostles in Jerusalem. We don't know why. as soon as he said that, I thought, well, if you look back here, I can tell you why. Because Jesus told him to wait. So you knew we're in trouble. So then he goes on, and every time he said Holy Spirit, over the speakers you heard like a rush of wind. And then people would chuckle in the audience, going, "Good grief." Every single time he said that. So not only was he way off on his expository or attempted expositing preaching, not only was she way off on her expository preaching, but all these gags and devices and everything, which, people found quite entertaining and so forth. That's flippancy. Well, okay, sorry about that. So to be sure, there are many churches that demean the name of Christ through worship that is more entertainment than worship. This passage is the call to fear God and honor Him in our worship and in our lives under the sun. And so think of that, remember that, as we approach worship today, our worship is simple. It's very simple. And for a reason, because this is God saying, this is how I want you to worship me. And that's what we do. All right, anything else anybody want to add? All right, next week. I was dreading this part, but I think we can do this. We can do it. I survived the other one. Overview of the Song of Solomon.